Today, we're very excited. We have a special guest, Jill Lehman, author of Private Eye, together with two other co-authors, Ashley Watson and Paul Pangaro. It's an excellent book, and it really brings out some interesting topics about our use of artificial intelligence, and not just today, but potentially 20 years into the future, so it's pretty neat. Jill is a senior project scientist at Carnegie Mellon University's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. She has over 40 years of experience in this space, and we're so excited to talk to her today for what is sure to be a fascinating conversation to you. So thank you for coming to see us here at Tingenuity AI. Well, Jill, I'm Jacob. This is my brother Warren. We were visiting and getting excited about the chance to visit with you.
So we've been really excited to, just get to know people in the AI space and hear their thoughts, because we've been musing on it, but we always like to have other opinions and thoughts in the mix with what we're thinking and to learn more from what's going on in the world. Just we're curious.
I'm curious to hear what you have found to be the powerful use cases for each of you individually. I'm always collecting real use cases because I have strong opinions about, in theoretical and scientific grounding terms, what it's maybe not such a good idea to use it for at this stage of things. And those often fly in the face of popular opinion. But I love to hear the positive use case. I do, by the way, 40 years in the field, really love the technology. Very pro AI. Just very cautious about people whose motivation is firmly economic and not necessarily well grounded in what the science says and what the technology really can and can't do. Love to look forward, obviously, writing speculative fiction. Love to look forward in time, love to think about what's coming, but very important to differentiate between what's here and what might be.
So that's actually leads to my first question for you, which is, you mentioned you'd like to see more uses of AI that's not just firmly economic, right? But then you also mentioned what it can and cannot do. And I think that that's something that every time you turn around, there's a new article about what AI can do and, oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And so what are your thoughts in terms of what it can and cannot do, or what it should or should not do? It's like the Jurassic Park question, right? Like before, speaking of speculative fiction, but should we do it? So go ahead.
So, okay, great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say these things. So let me tell you what it isn't. Let me give you a very broad, um, sort of general rule to keep in mind, because for a lot of people, what AI means is ChatGPT and Midjourney. I'll name the two specific. Obviously, those are representatives of classes of software that are out there. But for a lot of people, they didn't really hear about AI. AI wasn't on the radar, and certainly not something they read a story about every day or a couple of times a week. But AI has been around for a long time, and ChatGPT and Midjourney in that class of what's called generative AI, is predicated on a particular approach to things, and it's a really powerful approach to do a lot of things. But here's what it can't do. And this is sort of I'm going to get on a little tiny soapbox, and you can feel free to knock me off at any time you want. Um, I encourage people who are in positions like the two of you to not allow yourself to be drawn into using words like hallucinate or think or reason, because these systems aren't doing any of those things. What they're doing is stochastic search. That's it. It's a bunch of stats, and they're doing that powerful math, that is to look for mathematical regularities. They're doing it on text. So I'm going to talk about large language models. They're doing it on text. And the really interesting thing about text is that human beings write it, and we write it for each other. And that means we don't put in most of what's going on. It's not in the text. We rely on our reader, who is also a human being, to know this stuff. So that if I write a restaurant scene for you, I don't have to tell you there are tables in a restaurant. I don't have to mention the waitress or waiter unless that person actually is integral to the narrative. I don't have to tell you there are probably windows, that I parked the car, that it's probably, if it's a restaurant, it's not in my house. I don't the number of things I don't have to tell you is enormous because I can rely on you having the experience. And when I do tell you something, I'm telling it to you because I want it to be salient, and chances are I'll use it later on. When you learn statistical regularities over text, you can only learn the relationships that are actually in the text. So all the stuff that isn't there, that's based on our experience, and that we as writers expect you as readers to bring to the text, that's actually what we call meaning. In human language, that's what words mean. The words are just the thing I use to get you to your experience, so you can fill in all the blanks of what I'm not saying so we can be efficient. And the words that I choose to pass over to you, I choose based on my experience. And in fact, if we don't have the same experience, we have this whole mechanism for saying things like, "What are you talking about? And I don't know what you mean. Could you define that word?" And all kinds of other stuff. And LLMs don't do any of that. They're not, what they're doing is they're applying stats, and that's incredibly powerful because language has a lot of statistical phenomena in it. And so my general rule is, before you try to use an LLM or generative AI in whatever form, an agent, because agents are going to be really big this year, before you try and use a language-based agent to do anything, ask yourself the following question. If you were having the conversation or making the request of a human being, would you want that human being to have the experience you're talking about? If you want the human to have the experience, don't ask an AI, because it doesn't. It can sound as if it does, and the power of it sounding as if it does comes from your experience. It's the meaning you bring to its words. It's not its own experience. And so my canonical example is, do you really, really want to go to a therapist who's never felt pain? Do you really want to talk to a therapist about the end of your marriage when it's never been married, doesn't know what love is, doesn't know what it feels to lose a long-term relationship, doesn't know or experience time at all? Can throw a lot of words like tomorrow and forever, and you'll get over it, and use past tense and future tense, all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't know what you know. And so if it is important to you that the thing you're conversing with, or the thing you're asking to carry out actions on your behalf, or to represent you in the web sphere, right? Answer questions for you, for somebody who's coming, so is representing you. Do you really want something to do that, that hasn't, whether you're on the giving or the receiving end, that doesn't have human experience? Because it doesn't. And I think that there are a lot of application areas, and this is not to say there aren't application areas where you don't care about that. There absolutely are. But I think there are a lot of application areas where most people, and any particular individual, would say, no, I want to talk to a human. And that is a big piece of what Private Eye is saying. It's saying, it posits this law that hasn't been passed, which I would love to see some version of, which says basically, if you're an AI, you got to tell me you're an AI, and I have the right to refuse to interact with you and interact with the human instead. And what I've just blathered on about is why it has that as a basic construct, a basic conceit in the story.
So that I was about to ask. So you mentioned this, which is fascinating, by the way, and it's something that I've started to think about because people think, oh, we're on the cusp of AGI, but I've recently been thinking we're nowhere close, and there are some researchers that are saying we might even be barking up the wrong tree. Like this might not be the way to think about thinking about AGI, right? And so the personal assistant that your main character Paloma has. Well, so does Paloma follow the rules that you just mentioned? Because it does not seem like she does. It seems like she very much relies on this entity or whatever's talking in her ear a great deal. And it's not, and what's interesting is the assistant she has seems to have, I'm not exactly sure how yet, maybe it's through cameras or whatever, but he seems to have the ability to have some kind of spatial awareness, right? Can tell her who's around her, those kinds of things. So does your main character follow the frankly good advice that you just gave?
So keep in mind that this is 20 years in the future. And now that the genie is out, it's not going back in the bottle. And I've been working in the field for 40 years. We've come a long way. We will continue to come a long way. We will or go a long way. Marlowe, which is the name of the machine intelligence that Paloma has in her ear. And yes, there are cameras, lots of cameras, little nano, we call them nano cameras. So lots of them. Has been with her since age 4. And the big difference between the kinds of language models and AI that you're looking at now and the model of artificial intelligence or machine intelligence, as we call it, that Marlowe represents is that things like ChatGPT are what I would call a population model. They're language from everybody, not just everybody who's alive now, but everybody who ever wrote anything that we have a relic of. So the idea that that represents any kind of consistent viewpoint is kind of amusing and is why it's so easy to push these models in conversation into weird little corners where they say outrageous things because they have all kinds of um, little hills and dips and valleys and curves in that statistical space where if you manage to work yourself into a corner, you're really listening to a very small segment of the population that is speaking very consistently and very loudly, enough of the time to be essentially memorized and then parroted back. For Marlowe, it's just Paloma's life. That's it. All of Marlowe's data is Paloma's life. So now I would ask you to think about Marlowe, not as a population model, not as a representation of everything everybody's ever written or said, but a model of Paloma's life, what she's done, what she's said, what she's heard, what she sees, how she acts, how she moves, microsecond by microsecond, millisecond by millisecond. And ask yourself, if you had something that was a model of you, now instead of an angel and a devil sitting on your shoulder, you could talk to yourself. You could get back something that had not superhuman access to your past, but a little bit better access to your past than you have, because we can't remember that accurately. That's not the way our brains form memories. It can't really work at superhuman speeds, but it can work a little faster than you can. It can look a little further ahead in the search space than you can. And it can do it in parallel with you while you're moving around in the world and eating breakfast and doing all the things it doesn't need to do. And while you sleep, it looks at what happens during the day and it says, I learned some stuff today. Turned out when I thought she was going to do that, she did that. I should go back and review everything that sort of looks like that, figure out why I went wrong, and how I might make a better prediction tomorrow, how I might learn a little bit more about her.
If I had an AI assistant similar to some kind of language model that had access to my lived experience, it would be, I imagine, infinitely more useful than anything that's out there, obviously. But does that solve the problems that you just mentioned, though? I mean, it still hasn't had the experience, right? So
Wonderful question. Best question you could have asked as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not going to answer it. And here's why. The reason I wanted to write this book was because, and please let me mention, I have two co-authors, um, Ashley Watson, who is the actual fiction writer of the three of us. She is the one with fiction writing experience, and Ashley um, performs the unbelievably important role in our threesome of being not aware of AI as a technology. Or so she brings full humanity to the script, and that allows me to represent the AI. And Paul, who is more cybernetician than AI practitioner, but is a longtime colleague with, whose conversations with me gave rise to the desire to write the book. Um, and our goal here is to not answer that question for you, but to put you in a time and a place and a relationship as an observer of a relationship that makes sense to you, that makes you ask those questions for yourself, that makes you think about, would I want Marlo? Is that the relationship I want with AI? What do I like about that relationship? What about that relationship bothers me? How is that different from what I have in my current relationship to this technology? How is that different from the other relationships to machine intelligence that are in this speculative fiction? But most importantly, how is it different from the vision of the relationship that should exist between people and AI that is being sold to you in this moment, sold to you by technologists, sold to you by Silicon Valley, sold to you by vested interests, sold to you by politicians, sold to you by regulators, sold to you by all the people who are coming on board to try to shape things. But you, as an individual, ultimately have to decide, what is the relationship that I want to this tool? At what point, for me, does it become superhuman? At what point, for me, would I think it might be conscious? Will I ever think that? If we don't start asking people to draw the line through their own lived experience, then I think all of the decisions get made very quickly, where quickly means 5 to 10 years, but very quickly over the next 5 to 10 years, in ways that are very hard for individuals to overcome, to to have choice. I think there'll be less choice. There'll be less possibility to explore the space. And I think at this moment in time, that's not a great thing. I don't think we want, in the words of Silicon Valley, I personally do not think we want to fail fast and often. I think it would be better if we if we thought a little bit, um and maybe gave ourselves time to think and time to reflect on what's true and what's not true, educate ourselves a little.
So I hear you. And that was actually one of the first things that popped out to me as a lawyer, right? Open the book. In anticipation of the Machine Intelligence Self-Identification Act, the authors affirm that no part of this story or text was produced by or with the help of an AI model or text generator. And so you mentioned, we should take time to think. How do you respond to the idea that this is a global thing that's happening? So if we take time to stop and think, we're going to get behind other countries who aren't. How do you respond to kind of that argument?
First of all, I think it's a false dichotomy. I don't think that it's all or nothing. I think that you can um, think hard about, what do you need to do in the worst case scenario, and hedge those bets. But I don't think it means that you have to throw your hands up and say, well, whatever you say goes, because I'm so terrified of what somebody else might do. Keep in mind that other countries that do barrel ahead are likely to fall into the black hole, right? To the extent that there are real harms, that are potential harms here, people who do not sit back and reflect, who do not ask themselves hard questions and um, proceed with some caution, are likely to make mistakes. I don't think I have yet to see, unless it is unpublished research coming out of other countries, I have yet to see the papers that prove to me, in a mathematical sense, prove to me that anybody can predict what a model will or will not do. And while that is true, it makes me nervous to think about OpenAI getting in bed with military outfits, and it makes me nervous to think about China using these kinds of models, or Venezuela, or I mean, pick your favorite country, okay? I'm not trying to create a us them. I'm like, pick any country, okay? Any country at all, whether there are allies or not. I don't want any country doing this, um, and I get that if one country does it, you want to have somebody who's thinking about that. Doesn't mean you want to be doing it yourself, and doesn't mean you want to spend all your time and energy barreling down that pathway to the exclusion of actually figuring out, for example, a proof that demonstrates why you shouldn't. And therefore, everybody else who's doing it will have wasted their time. Because once you publish the paper that says, here, it's provably correct that I will always be able to X, suddenly people are going to go, oh, okay, well, maybe that's not such a good idea.
So I want to make sure Warren has time to ask a question too, but I thought of another one. So I know you mentioned Marlowe, right? You leave that question unanswered as to whether or not it has a kind of lived experience or kind of awareness. But you know, as I've read about this topic and begun to feel like some of the concerns are a little overblown, that we're on the cusp of AGI and those kinds of things. But you mentioned all of this criteria that for some uses, today's version of AI is not well suited for example, therapy, or, you know, it's not aware of what might be in a restaurant, those kinds of things.
And that's what I want to talk about.
What kind of AI, or what features would an artificial intelligence have to have in order to meet kind of that, I guess, definition of consciousness where you'd feel more comfortable using it in those kinds of ways?
So there are a lot of people out there who have published a lot of different papers of varying degrees of accessibility to non-technical people, arguing for this or that definition of consciousness, this or that definition of AGI, all that kind of stuff. Um, I think for me, what the issue comes down to is I'm not looking to replace humans, because we are terribly flawed in very particular ways. And what I mean by that is we just don't think that fast. Our memory kind of stinks. It's very reconstructive. It's not very accurate. I could list a whole bunch of cognitive problems that we have that are endemic to our physiology. They're just, it comes with the package. Okay. Not going to get over it anytime soon. And because of that, and we've been around a long time. And so my co-authors kid me about this. This is what they call one of Lehman's laws. You can't beat evolution. We are not going to evolve beyond this package anytime real fast. And human society has been around for a long time, and we have grown up around us ways of interacting, conventions, social structures, infrastructure, scaffolding, I don't care what word you want to use, that allow us to live within our limits in ways that are not perfect, but are at our time scale. They acknowledge that we don't live forever. They acknowledge that we have a debt to the future. They acknowledge that we have a partial understanding of the past, whether it's a global past, our own personal past. All of these conventions allow me to interact with the two of you and know that I can model you. That my words have a chance of meaning what I think they mean, and that I am not alone, that I can connect with you. I am not alone. I can overcome, I can do more because there's only so much I can do. I can do more with you as a friend. I can do more with my community as a community acting together. I can do more on the planet if people, and it's not that we ever get it all right, but the what we call in computer science the space of possible solutions that we can search through is very much determined by evolution. It's very much determined by how fast we think, how fast we move, the fact that we have to be co-located to do things together with our hands, all kinds of stuff like that. I'm not looking to turn existence over to something that doesn't have those same constraints. I want a human in the loop. I think the likelihood that we as humans can create something that will do a perfect job or even a provably better job is more than 20 years away. 20 years is where the book takes place, 20 years from now. And there's a reason for that. Okay. I think that's way more than 20 years away. I won't be alive when our grandkids, great grandkids, or whatever have the conversation in which maybe somebody can say, I have a proof that if we all rely on this thing, it will manage better than humans can manage. And here's why. We sure don't have it now. I can't say absolutely we will never have it. I don't believe we'll have it in 20 years. And that's why that's why this book and the sequel too, that we're hopefully finishing soon, which ties up the narrative, is an exploration of different paths through this negotiated relationship between humanity and the individual and technology, or this particular kind of technology, AI. Because I think this question is going to go on for a very long time. And I don't have an answer. I just know that right now, I would rather, given what I know and given what I see on the horizon, what I think I could build. Somebody wants to read this, like DARPA, read this, then give me lots of money. Could I build Marlowe in 20 years? Yes, I think I could build Marlowe. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think Marlowe is conscious. I'm also not going to tell you I don't think Marlowe is conscious, because I want you to decide that for yourself, because my criteria aren't your criteria. And I think we all need to get really straight on what our own individual criteria are, so that we can have these conversations every day in classrooms, in high school. I work with a local high school with their computer science class, to when they do machine learning, to talk about these issues, to say to them, please don't use words like hallucination. Actually, I said that to the two teachers in front of the students. I said, please don't use the word hallucination. They're not hallucinating. They're doing exactly the same processing when they give you a wrong answer as they do when they give you something that sounds right to you. So there's no difference going on there in what they're doing. Hallucination makes it sound like there is. Don't use thinking, don't use reasoning. They're not doing either of those things the way your students understand those words. Let's talk about search. Let's talk, good computer science terms that your students all know the mathematical underpinnings of. Let's keep it in those terms, because that's what's really going on.
That's one of the fascinating things, and when you began to share with us, one of the things that really struck to me was, and it's because I'm such a fan of language and linguistics in general, that the experience that's backing all of those words. If I were to say the word dog, all three of us are going to see a different dog in our heads. I'm going to see a German Shepherd because that's the dog that I see. Jacob's going to see something different. You're going to see something different. And that experience, and this is what I tell everybody that when I'm talking to them about artificial intelligence, is you need to bring your experience to this tool, because it isn't, like you're saying, it isn't thinking, it isn't reasoning. We're the reasoning element. We're the ones thinking. So dive more into that experiential component that we as humans bring to the AI.
Well, you can find out on the internet anywhere. People, in fact, I do this because one of the interesting things about Private Eye, or the experience of writing Private Eye, is we started during COVID, during lockdown, and we finished it 1 month before ChatGPT dropped, which is why we added that thing on the copyright page, because we looked at each other and said, "The world is about to be flooded." Paul and I knew that a ChatGPT-like thing would be coming because we work with the students in machine learning and natural language processing and all that kind, and, Bert was there and all the other predecessors. So, that was what motivated us to write it. We knew what was coming. We didn't think it was gonna come next Wednesday, but it did. Um, and we
Jeez.
had to
I like that.
we had to decide when it dropped, and suddenly every single article out there was Gen AI this and Gen AI that and ChatGPT and OpenAI and everything else. We had to decide what to do because we wrote it. We wrote it as noir because Paul and I love noir, but we wrote it as noir because we wanted it to be accessible and we wanted to have a trope that people could immediately understand to carry them through the technology pieces. Um, and suddenly our readership was getting educated way faster than what we had assumed our readership would know when we wrote it. And we looked at each other and said, like, what do we do? And this is entirely my fault. I convinced the other two, let's just self-publish it. Because even if we find a publisher, now that AI is a big word, it's going to be a year before a publisher brings it to market. And I want us to be part of the conversation. I don't want to wait. So we self-published and we put exactly what you read on the copyright page because we wanted to be clear. We knew Amazon was going to get flooded with stuff that was being produced by GPTs, and we wanted it to be clear. This was not, some kind of self-referential work by ChatGPT. We'd really written this. We thought about it. Um, and I think that uh, it's harder now that we're working on the sequel, on tying up the narrative because so much has changed. So I spend a lot of time every day reading the popular press, where the popular press means everything from like Gizmodo and Wired, I mean popular tech press, and Gizmodo, Wired, TechCrunch, all those kinds of things, to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, all those kinds of things, which are even less technically oriented in general, to things that are in the trade, to research papers. So widely. I read a wide swath every day. Um, because we're stuck with the commitments we made in book 1 about what this world is and what this world isn't. But we're writing for a different reader, and we want to be able to keep that reader uh interested, and we want to keep the feel that we're telling them something about the future that they maybe haven't thought about or maybe should think about. And so I think this idea about what you bring versus what the AI brings is a really interesting sort of sliding, you think of it as a sliding widget on your screen, okay? Um I read all the time about people who say, I just use ChatGPT to write my newsletter or to do coding. I'm using, Copilot to code and I can't do this and I can't do that. Or I did it in something that used to take me 3 hours, just took me 15 minutes, or I put together, right? So I read up here and I read down here. I read the people who say, this is the best thing that's ever happened. Everybody's going to be out of a job. And then I read down here the people who say, what is all the hubbub about? Like, this is crazy. Because it doesn't work, or it doesn't work for me, or and and both of those are correct. So what's going on now is individuals, corporations, larger units, pick your favorite kind of unit, are figuring out what the use cases are. Where is their value? In much the same way it took 10 years before computers, people figured out what computers are good for and what they aren't good for. right? There's some things where it turns out not so great that we have computers stuck in the middle of these things. Because at least when we had pieces of paper in filing cabinets, things were small enough that um, you had to have a physical presence to open the filing cabinet. And the person who opened the filing cabinet actually probably knew what was in the filing cabinet. And so if you had 100 filing cabinets and somebody had to actually open the filing cabinet, you probably had 5 people, and at least somebody in the office knew the person who was calling on the other side of the phone to say there was a problem. And even if they didn't know the person particularly, they'd read a bunch of things that they'd had to read in order to fill out the forms to put them in the filing cabinet and figure out where they went. Now, none of that happens. You've got an interface. It's your responsibility to fill in the thing. It goes into a file somewhere. Until you call and complain, nobody's ever heard of you. Chances are nobody ever will. Uh, that's okay until there's a problem. And then where does responsibility lie? Who knows? Where is the institutional memory? Is it in a file or is it in a person? What is the process by which institutional memory is preserved and brought to bear in problem solving? And what do our social institutions, legal, um, religious, political, say about where that responsibility is supposed to reside? So I think this widget is very much tied into what is the human bringing versus what is the technology bringing, is very much tied into this question of responsibility and the flip side of responsibility, trust. Do I trust you, the person, to be you? This is one of the things we start right off in the sequel about what's going to happen with things that look like people that aren't people anymore. Where's the responsibility? Um, Again, we go back to Misida, right? You have to tell me you're an AI. You have to tell me, you have to give me the choice. Imagine what happens if you do that, right? Suddenly, every company that's looking to replace all of its entry level people with AI, what happens when I say no? You want me to deal with your company? You need to give me a person. If I don't have that act, if I don't have that law, that is what will happen because you can already see it. That is what's happening with customer service. There's either just a chatbot or there's a person with a script in front of them who has no idea. Uh, they're not even allowed to answer anything that isn't in the script. They have to get through the entire script before they can elevate you to a person who might or might not know the product. Wouldn't you rather talk to somebody in customer service who's actually used the product? Has hands maybe? Like if it's a product that requires hands?
See?
I don't know. To me, that
Yeah.
seems like if I'm gonna ask you to solve my problem, it would be good if you had hands, if it's a thing that I need to do a manipulation with.
Yeah,
Or
we
to
call
tell
about
me, "No,
shoes.
don't use your hands, go get a screwdriver." I don't know. Um, so there's this you can think of sort of this widget, but now you have to think about so that's one dimension, right? What is the responsibility, what is and trust, and how much does that depend on human versus how much can you actually get rid of a human and still have it work well enough? So economy of scale can be a good thing because there aren't enough therapists, right? Or there aren't enough whatever. And and the distribution of who gets to use them isn't fair and equal. And so there's lots of problems where economies of scale might help. And figuring all of this out, that's one dimension. And then the other dimension is we're not going to have AGI tomorrow. Okay? So we're not going to have in one of these autonomous bots something that knows everything that a human knows and has the experience of a human. And all of this stuff that you're going to be reading in the next year about agents, what is the underpinning that went on top of the large language models is just the rest of the history of AI. Okay. people in AI have been building reasoning systems based on logic, reasoning systems based on symbolic systems, reasoning systems based on neurosymbolic systems, all that kind of stuff. And it's all being imported into the paradigm. It's all basically search, what's called heuristic search, because that's what AI is. It's all heuristic search. And it will continue to have all kinds of problems because it's had all kinds of problems for the last 50, 60 years. And we haven't suddenly solved those problems. One of the things that we know is if you're really vested in a chatbot working when you go to Wendy's and order a hamburger, we can build a lived experience model for Wendy's that will work. Now, that bot isn't going to know anything about anything except what people at Wendy's want to order and how a Wendy's fills the order. Not about how Wendy's works, not about how hamburgers are made or anything else, but how Wendy's fills an order. We can actually build the meaning structures that would underlie the words that go with I want a hamburger, getting you a hamburger. Okay, we can do that. It will take time, it will take money. I don't know whether the economics work out. No idea, okay? But we know how to do that. It won't work for McDonald's, by the way. It'll only work for
Yeah, it'll be a company by company use case.
really won't work for Taco Bell, okay? Or Subway. And you're gonna have to start all over again when instead you wanna be ordering T-shirts from Hanes or, whatever's left of a department store, which we don't have, which we have fewer and fewer of. So in each, what we in the business call domains, in each little task domain, we know how to build something where you'll get it right a lot of the time. Enough of the time, again, where economy of scale might help you. But you aren't going to be able to then take each one of those things and just put them all together in one big lump and call it AGI. That's not going to work either. But that is what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. You are going to have the use cases fall out, and everyone will set those two sliders a little bit differently. How much of the use case do they handle, and how much responsibility falls on a human being, whether that human being is you, the customer, right? To bring meaning, to accommodate language, so that you figure out, God, no. Oh, this is my favorite example. I have a great good friend, family friend, whose name is Dion. Um, my husband, I do not. I have a really old clunker car. My husband has a newer car. It's got a voice, whatever. I don't know. It's not Siri. It's whatever it is. Um, and so when he's driving and he wants to tell our friend that we're coming to pick her up, he has to say, whatever the name of the assistant is, tell Dione we're on the way.
Has to mispronounce the name.
Yes, because
Yeah.
no matter how many times we try to tell it, right? It's not. So you, as a human being, you go, I can fix this problem. I will simply start calling her Dione to this device, right?
Yeah.
I don't suddenly get to her and call her Dione. I still call her Dion. But that's what's going to happen. It is always the case. And so I'm going to humble brag for just 1 second, and I swear to God, I'll shut up and let you ask another question. But I'm a humble brag for a second, okay? My PhD thesis 40 years ago was a self-adaptive natural language interface that allowed you to use language the way you wanted to use it to do a task. And the task, this small task domain, was for actually administrative assistance. It was calendar keeping. And I did all my experimentation with admins at Carnegie Mellon. And the whole point of it was you can use whatever language you want to use to talk to this thing or to type to this thing, to keep your boss's calendar and your own calendar, and it will learn your language. Okay? That is the problem that large language models solve. That is exactly the problem that they solve if you have on the other side of it what I was just talking about. a representation of the task, what a calendar is, who you know, all that kind of stuff, so that you can hook it up. Oh, there's this action in the world. Change the time of the appointment. This is the way Joe wants to say it. This is the way Warren wants to say it. This is the way Margaret wants to say it. And we now have a language model that is big enough and general enough that no matter how you as an individual want to say it, it's likely that it can learn to do the right thing. But it needs the meaning on the other side. Okay? I solved that problem 40 years ago with a different technology. Now we're solving it again with a better technology. Don't get me wrong. Hopefully they won't take my PhD away, but with a better technology.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's what it does in a nutshell. And all the other parts of the problem still need to be integrated and solved.
One of the things that I've enjoyed listening to you as you talk about is where you started with this thought process that it seems to me, you've got a PhD in computer science, but you seem very concerned about the human element in all of this, which I think, people envision computer science PhD and they think, okay, somebody who's really into like the electronic technical side, right? But you seem very, very, and I think appropriately so, focused on how humans fit into all of this, which makes a lot of sense, right? And so, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. You haven't said that it's dangerous. You haven't used the word danger at all, which I thought was interesting as I've listened to you. But I've seen articles, for example, people with AI boyfriends and girlfriends and those kinds of things, these very human things. And so I guess my question is for you, would you use the word danger? Do you consider it dangerous for people to use it like that? Even if they feel like they get some kind of help that they're not getting from perhaps somebody who has hands and thoughts? If they, what if there is a study out there eventually that discovers that there are better cognitive behavioral outcomes if you use an AI versus a human therapist? These are questions that are going to happen. People are going to look at this. So what's your thought process on that? Because it seems, and again, you can edit this question however you want. You're not exactly saying human equals better, but you're saying human equals important piece of conversation as we evaluate the tools. So tell me your thoughts on that.
So human equals, we have societal structures in place when things go wrong. So it's not the case that every doctor's going to get it right. But we know how to decide when a doctor who gets it wrong is responsible and it can be prosecuted under malpractice.
From a
And
legal
we
liability
have,
standpoint, that's important. Yeah.
but also from an ethical standpoint. I mean, yes, there's also law is one social construct, but ethics is another social construct.
Yeah.
And interpersonal relations, we have part of what we do when we vet another person and we decide, do I want to trust you? Is we try to figure out, are they trustworthy? And we have ways to do that. We have ways that are part of our developmental sequence, right? Do they make eye contact? This is a biggie, unfortunately, for a segment of the population. Do they tell the truth? How do I know when they haven't told the truth? I don't even know sometimes how I know when they tell the truth, but I know when they aren't, even though I can't tell you how I knew that they weren't, because biologically I'm set up. If I'm neurotypical, I'm set up to know those signs and signals. And I've learned them without necessarily having ever articulated a theory to myself of, oh yes, the eye does this, or, you get a scrunch here or whatever it is. So we have all kinds of fallback because people aren't perfect and they go wrong. And sometimes they go wrong intentionally. And we have the word intention, and intention matters. We cannot, at least right now, again, not talking about Marlowe, we cannot ascribe
That was my
intention.
next question. So
Nope,
it's a
we
very
cannot
personal
ascribe
relationship here.
intention.
It's anyway.
We cannot ascribe intention to current systems. So maybe a better way to say what I was saying before is, do you want to be able to just ascribe intention? Do you want to be able to posit or intention? And if you do, if intention matters to you, then do not interact with something that cannot have intent. Okay? And I don't know for you personally. If you're going to a therapist for something like um uh I want systematic exposure therapy for my OCD all around this issue. Okay? It could well be that you want a consistent conversational partner that will put up with at 4 in the morning every time you get out of bed and are suddenly racked by these thoughts, will lead you through a script. That could actually be great. I don't know. I don't know enough about how CBT works for that particular scenario, but I can imagine scenarios. And so I don't use the word danger because I think danger is too blanket. I think that I think that human beings, I think that there are a lot of pressures right now, huge pressures to make AI part of as many fingers in as many pies, as many threads through as many parts of our lives as possible. And it's really, really important that we ask these questions of ourselves. Do I want to trust that thing? For me, right now in my situation, I don't want to tell you it's wrong. I want you to be able to decide in a reasoned way. And I really want you to have the choice to not use it. In a perfect world, everybody would have the choice. That is, they would have access to a human. They would have, for anything they wanted a human for, they would have access to an AI for anything they wanted or felt they could trust an AI to do. Everyone would have equal access and it would all play out beautifully. And the use cases would come to match quickly and asymptotically exactly what the technology can and can't do. And we know that is never going to happen because it's not the way anything happens. It's an
Right,
idealized
right.
world.
I was just gonna say, I can see one service being offered $10 with AI, $1,000 with human. Like that's where
So
it would.
we have so here no, we have no, no, no. So what we posit in the world of 2046 is pay stream versus free stream. It's not $1,000 for human and $10 for AI. It's pay with your data or pay with your money. Right? So this is a separate issue. It's not about, do I know if I'm dealing with an AI? This is an economic issue. And it says, okay, if you're going to have AI where a critical aspect of that AI is data, I produce the data. No, you can't have it for free. And I get you've been giving me a service, but no, I'm not willing to give you my data. Either I'm paying with my data. You don't get to both have the service, have control over my data, control over my service, one or the other. Either I'll pay you with my data, in which case I get the service for free, or I'll give you some money and then you don't get to have my data. And what would happen under that kind of economic scenario is competition, right? It would be um, how much does this segment of the population want to pay that amount of money? You will get Reddit looking like, or X will put its flag in the sand, and it will attract a particular distribution of humans who want to pay with data versus humans who want to pay with money. And then the data, the model that underlies Grok, will come to reflect the proportion that paid with their data. And that will drive some of the people who paid with their money away. And so it will come to have a more coherent character. And then that gives rise to another place. And that gives rise to another place. But as things ebb and flow, the underlying economy remains. I get to make the choice. What do I want to spend my money on? What do I want to give my data to? And it stays with me.
Right. I sympathize with that as well. Like when I buy a car or something of that nature, I always immediately pull the anything that indicates that it was from this dealership or that dealership, because I'm like, unless you're going to give me some money, I'm not going to advertise for you. And this is a marketer talking about that. This is a marketer going, no, I'm not going to wear your logo on my T-shirt unless you give me a kickback.
But you're giving people your data right and left all day long. And there's nobody stopping it, either through economic pressure, right? Or through legal pressure. Nobody is stopping this from happening.
How do we plug you? Where do we find you? It's been a fascinating conversation. So how do we stalk you online? All of that.
Private Eye. Oop, there we go. I got to get it. Private Eye. It's available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback. Hopefully the sequel will be coming out sometime before the summer. We hope that your listeners will be interested enough to go and read it. And we doubly hope that if they do agree to do or do decide to do that, that they will leave their reviews, their thoughts on places like Goodreads or Amazon reviews or whatever, because we all know how SEO works, search engine optimization, for those who might not be familiar with the acronym. In terms of web presence, I confess that I have a very small footprint. I'm on LinkedIn. My personal webpage is out at Carnegie Mellon. I do not live on places like Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. So many people tell me I should, but I do not.
You can join our club. We don't spend a lot of time on the socials either.
Yeah,
we start our own website for people who don't use the others. Anyway, keep going.
No, that's my web footprint. Facebook for friends and family, and looking to figure out how to get off it and get people who may not feel as capable to easily transfer to go on something like Mastodon or Blue Sky, so I can stay in touch with them. LinkedIn, and then my professional contact information is through Carnegie Mellon.
Okay. And a quick plug for your co-authors too. Anything that we should know about them or where to find them online?
They have fairly small footprints as well, although
Okay.
Paul Pangaro is also the head of American Association for Cybernetics. So I think he has a webpage for that. He's a design guy. So he's got a slightly better web presence, a much more attractive web presence than I do, and slightly more complete. And I think Ashley might even have an Instagram or TikTok account. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's Ashley Watson, ASHLEI Watson, and look us up on Amazon, and you can find spelling and all kinds of those author links kind of things. But yes, we're very, very bad at marketing, and we hope to get better real soon, or maybe doing interviews like this one. And thank you both so much. This could not have been more fun for me either. Hoping that someone out there in publishing land will say, hey, they've got a book and it's about AI, and they're going to have another one. We should get them and then they can take over marketing. So always
your sequel will be on the New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be very nice. Well, as I said, we're really in this. We're in this to try to provoke conversation and to provoke a set of ideas that are not being surfaced, and that we as human beings believe other human beings might like to hear and think about and surface and talk about.
If that's your intent, I think the book does raise a lot of those interesting questions, which led to this interesting conversation. So thank you very much,
Great.
Jill. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. It was great.
Well, thank you all for attending our great conversation with Jill. It's been fantastic having her here. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. If you want to connect with Jill, we'll put some links into our description here, especially for her book, Private Eye, and to help you connect with her and her co-authors, and look forward to seeing you soon.